As the situation in the Central African Republic continues to worsen, the EU is expected to send troops to boost the peacekeeping force in this war-torn country. But will this be enough? That is a military approach the only answer? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to Inside Story. I'm Adrian Finigan. Sectarian violence continues in the Central African Republic between Muslim-led Seleka rebels and the Christian anti-Balaka fighters. But can the violence be stopped? More than 1,000 people have been killed in the Central African Republic in the last month alone, putting a strain on the peacekeeping forces already on the ground there. EU ministers are expected to approve the deployment of several hundred more troops. But can this really make any difference? Let's take a closer look at what's going on. Peacekeeping troops have been in the Central African Republic for a little over a year now, following the ousting of President Jazeera. France initially sent between 800 and 1,000 troops, but that was outside a UN mandate. Then the UN Security Council late last year approved the deployment of those forces under a UN mandate. This was to bolster some 2,600 forces already there from the Economic Community of Central African States. But towards the end of last year, the African Union took charge of that force. And by the end of this month, the AU operation is expected to reach some 6,000 troops. But as Al Jazeera's Barnaby Phillips reports now, peacekeeping forces are struggling to keep control of an increasingly dangerous sectarian conflict. And just a warning, you may find that some of the images in Barnaby's report are disturbing.
They are baying for blood. This crowd of Christians want to get their hands on a Muslim hiding inside the house. They say he was involved in the killing of a Christian, and now they want revenge. He's pulled from the house. It's too distressing to show you what happened next. But after the man was hacked to pieces, he was set on fire. A second Muslim was murdered just nearby. Apparently, he'd been hiding in a church. He too was set on fire. And as the corpses are ritually abused, the crowd celebrates.
We will continue to do this for as long as Muslims will go on.
It's hard to imagine what impact these scenes will have on all those who watched. French peacekeepers arrived, but it was too late. African soldiers from Cameroon also appeared. They eventually moved into the crowd.
It's a lawless situation here, and yet we're right in the middle of the capital, Bangui. And under these circumstances, the African and indeed the French peacekeepers are struggling to keep a lid on the sectarian hatred.
This time, the crimes were caught on camera, but similar killings are happening on a daily basis, and not just here in Bangui, but across the country.
All right, let's bring in our three guests on today's Inside Story. With me here in the studio, I'm joined by Sylvain Touati, who's Africa analyst at Fikra, a Doha-based political think tank. Then in Paris, we've got Louis Keumayou, president of the Pan-African Press Association. And joining us via Skype from Paris, Vincent Darracq, who's a global security analyst specialising on Africa. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Sylvain, what lies at the root of the current conflict in the Central African Republic, the sectarian element in particular? The CAR hasn't experienced sectarian strife, at least on this scale before, has it?
Not on this scale, definitely. We've seen a rise of sectarian speeches, anti-sectarian speeches on both sides since 2012, notably by François Bozizé, who was trying to get support from Christian population against the rebellion from the Seleka, which is mainly composed from Muslim fighters, but not only, and from very different groups. And as François Bozizé was saying, that his situation was not really good. He was trying to play as many other leaders we've seen all over the world, using sectarian lines to try to mobilize population for him.
All right, let's bring in Louis Keumayou then in Paris. Louis, from your point of view, what's driving the crisis in the CAR at the moment? Is it a thirst for revenge, long-held resentments? Is it tribal rivalry or perhaps external factors? Why do the militias, for instance, appear undeterred by the peacekeeping forces there?
The fact is that the people of the Central African Republic have considered during a long time that they were invaded by their neighbor, Chad, by Idriss Déby Itno, who is the president of that country. So when you are Muslim now in Central African Republic, they don't want to know from where you are. You are considered as a foreigner, as an invader, because in 2003, remember, when François Bozizé became president of the country, he came from Chad. He was helped by the Chadian president. And now, those who brought him to the capital, to the power, were called liberators. And those liberators have been terrorizing the population in Central African Republic. And that's why when he has been fired by the rebellion, the Seleka called rebellion, all the population considered those foreigners had to go back to their country. They had to go back to Chad.
Vincent, the CAR lies at a crossroads of conflict in the heart of Africa. Some of the African Union troops currently on the ground there are from Chad. Is it sensible to have troops from neighbouring states trying to keep the peace in the Central African Republic?
In the case of Chad, we can see that this is extremely sensitive, because Chad is not only a country which is bringing troops to keep peace and maintain the security environment in order in Central African Republic, but Chad is also party to the conflict. We know pretty well that Chad has always had a lot of influence in Central African Republic politics. It's especially true with Seleka. We know that Chad maybe did not directly support Seleka, but at least Chad was aware of what Seleka was trying to do when Seleka ousted Bozizé, and Chad gave the thumbs up to that. So basically you can see now that the presence of Chadian troops is extremely controversial in Chad, especially Christian population in the south see them as parting with, see them as siding with Seleka, and you can see that now there are some retaliatory attacks by local population on Chadian populations, and we can see that now what Chad is doing currently is not trying to maintain peace and do what they should be doing as a peacekeeping force, but Chadian troops are mainly involved in trying to bring Chadian populations out of the country back to Chad. So yes, of course, the presence of Chadian troops is extremely controversial and is a problem in itself.
Louis, I don't know whether you want to come back on that. I'm also interested to know who you think is leading the Seleka rebels, who, as we heard, are mostly but not exclusively Muslim. Is there perhaps an outside, a foreign influence at play there?
Well, the fact is that Seleka was a very disparate group in which you could find 16 groups of rebels, different groups who had different agendas also. But what is the common way for them is they were based in the northern part of the country. They were at the northeast of the country and northwest of the country, and also at the northwest of the country. So it means at the borders with Chad and Sudan. Michel Djotodia, who was the president of the country for the transition, were a former consul of the Central African Republic in Sudan. So they were really, at the end of the rebellion was that they were Muslim in a large majority. The widest part of the rebellion was made of those people, especially coming from Sudan, coming from Chad, like Nourdine Adam, who has just left Central African Republic through Cameroon to join Djotodia in Benin. But if we consider Chad is part of the problem, we can also consider France is part of the problem, because since the beginning, since 1959, France has been making and dismaking the presidents in Central African Republic. So Chad is now doing the same with the new power, because they are the new emerging country of the zone. They have the military power to do it. They are helping France, for example, in Mali, in the Operation Serval. there, and they are doing the same in the Central African Republic. And before the conflict became so dangerous, they were there with other countries of the Central African countries. So they are part of the problem, but they are also part of the solution. And I think dialogue should be a frank dialogue between France, Chad, and all the other neighboring countries of Central African Republic, because Central African Republic doesn't have any facade, maritime facade, as Cameroon or as DRC. So if those countries try to maintain peace, to maintain the situation in Central Africa.
I just want to get a thought from Sylvain on that. We're talking about the sensitivity there of the involvement of Chad and the role that France is playing. French troops on the ground are currently accused of being partial to the majority Christian population in the Central African Republic. There are reports of them disarming Seleka fighters, but not the Christian anti-Balaka fighters. What are we to make of those claims? Is there any truth to them? And what are the implications, if indeed there is?
Definitely, France has been on the ground trying to disarm both sides. The main issue here, and I think some of the claim and some of the fact maybe seems for some part of the population that France is helping anti-Balaka, is the fact that Seleka rebels, and when they say the capital, they have the most weapons. They're the strongest force there. They were controlling the cities. They were in power. Officially, they're still in power. So when you disarm one faction, which is most harmed than the other one, the problem is the anti-Balaka, so-called anti-Balaka militia. As soon as you disarm militias from the Seleka, they're attacking those fighters. And it seems that as soon as you disarm one side, the other side is attacking it. And I think that's one of the very sensitive actions that France needs to look at, is the fact that how it's perceived by the population right now. As Chad, as we mentioned before, the role of Chad is very sensitive. But I think really France is trying to be neutral, but the fact is, as soon as you disarm one side, the other side is attacking. On both sides, by the way. Anti-Balaka militia has been disarmed, and just afterward you have attacks on their houses as well. So it's very difficult on the ground.
Okay, let's broaden this out a little further. As we've been discussing, the EU is expected to send more troops to the Central African Republic. 28 European foreign ministers were in Brussels on Monday, deciding on whether or not to send as many as 1,000 more peacekeeping troops. Now, this will be the EU's first major operation in 6 years. The intervention comes after the UN warned that the CAR was at risk of genocide. Al Jazeera's Jackie Rowland is in Brussels with more on that meeting.
The European Union force will number approximately 500, and its primary duty will be to secure the airport and ensure the safe delivery of food and other humanitarian aid. The idea being that then the French forces and the other West African troops will be freed up to be able to spread out throughout the country as a whole and start trying to address ethnic tensions, interracial violence, retributions that have been taking place in other parts of the country. Obviously, as long as they're tied to the airport, tied to the capital, then they aren't able to address the wider ranging problems. Now, clearly, securing the safe delivery of aid and food is absolutely vital. The UN is saying that almost 1 million people are displaced from their homes within the Central African Republic. Nearly 100,000 have crossed over into neighbouring countries to try to escape the violence. And also, according to the UN, more than half the population is desperately in need of food, medical supplies and other help. So clearly, having additional forces on the ground will be vital. What isn't clear is whether this will be enough. Certainly it's unlikely to be enough in itself to actually stem the violence, which some officials, notably the UN Human Rights Chief, are warning could actually spread into a wider ranging violence.
Jackie Rowland in Brussels. Vincent, the African Union peacekeeping force will number 6,000 when it's at full strength. There are 1,500 French troops there, along with these EU troops who are going to join them. But with 600,000 square kilometres to police, clearly there just aren't enough boots on the ground at the moment to prevent violence, as reports from the remote northwest of the country near Boa at the weekend show. How big does that force need to be to make any difference?
Well, you're absolutely right. The problem right now is that French troops and African troops are not numerous enough, and you can see it in the shortcoming of what France is trying to do at the moment. French troops and African troops were supposed to deploy to the countryside after securing Bangui to secure the main roads and the main cities in the province. But you can see that now it's not possible because all these troops have to stay in Bangui to look after the security environment in the capital. And you can see that only French troops are only, I think, in Boali, in Bossangoa, so they are not able to move elsewhere in the country. Well, it's difficult to evaluate the number of troops which will be involved, but obviously, as you mentioned, the country is wide, the country is huge. It's extremely difficult to access some parts of it because of lack of infrastructures, because of climatic conditions. So I think the first thing to do would be basically when Bangui is secure, which is a work in progress, but we can see some improvement. Then French troops and African troops will have to go to the west of the country, because this is where most of the exactions are taking place right now, because this place is a stronghold of the anti-Balaka militias. And once this is done, I think that much of the work to be done in the Central African Republic will have been achieved. So to give you a number of troops involved will be a little bit difficult, but yeah, I think once Bangui is secure, then we'll be able to see some progress probably in the west of the country.
Louis, however many EU troops and French troops there are on the ground there in the Central African Republic, it's the African Union who make up the bulk of that peacekeeping force. I wonder whether you think that African peacekeeping capacity is being stretched to breaking point right now, that there are deployments in Mali, Somalia, South Sudan, and now that the CAR. Are African peacekeepers up to the job?
They're trying to do the job, but the fact is that the African Union cannot pay the bill for those operations. So when they start a mission like that one, it is always paid 80% of the time by the European Union and the United States of America. So they can deploy more soldiers on the ground, but they have to get the help of the main partners as the UN or the US or the European Union even. So the fact is that we need now to have more people. We cannot say how many precisely, but I think at least there should be 6,000 people on the ground, because the fact is that when the soldiers are in front of the population, there is no exaction. But when they leave a quarter to another in way to fulfill their mission, exaction starts. So they have to be present the most of the time, everywhere at the same time. They have to be a massive. They have to benefit from a massive presence on the ground in way to protect all the populations, to not have this analysis we are having now that French are for the Christians and Chad is for Muslims, and there is a confessional war going on. So we have to deploy a massive presence of the soldiers on the ground, at least 5,005 or 6,000. Why not?
Sylvain, I know you want to talk about the presence of EU troops in the Central African Republic. Is the mandate of the international support mission up to the task, do you think? And I'd also want to know, speaking to a Frenchman here, how French intervention in the Central African Republic is viewed in France.
There's been a fierce debate in France over the last 2 years about French intervention. We've seen in Mali, for example, that the intervention was really supported by the population. Only few criticisms started about the cost of the operation. However, when the intervention started in December in Central African Republic, criticism were much fiercer, because really the cost is put is mentioned by many commentators in France about the fact that it costs too much money to intervene in these countries, that anyway the intervention is everlasting. It has since the independence, where France has intervened almost a dozen times in Central African Republic, and it seems that even with troops on the ground, there is no political solution so far to the conflict.
But that's when I come back to the point, is the international support mission, the mandate, is it up to scratch?
Not really. The international community has been present in Central African Republic for years now. It's not this is a military intervention from African Union, from the UN, from European Union. Already in 2008, European Union deployed troops in Central African Republic. I don't think Central African Republic is lacking an interest from the international community. It's just we still have a lack of imagination to find a political solution to the conflict so far. And as Louis mentioned, the only way to find a long-lasting solution in Central African Republic will be a dialogue with all the actors, the regional actors, the different groups in Central African Republic, and also by a restructuration of the armed force of Central African Republic, which are one part of the problem, not part of the solution so far.
Louis, we've talked about the involvement of France here. We've talked about Chad and CAR's near neighbours. We haven't yet mentioned in this discussion South Africa, which seems to be following a policy of non-intervention in the CAR. It lost 13 troops defending the former President Bozize and South African interests, of course. Should South Africa be playing a greater role here in keeping the peace in the Central African Republic? What more should it be doing?
No, I think they won't play any main role now, because when they came to help President Bozize, it was in way to train the military forces of Central African Republic. They were not there to fight opposition. They were not there to fight the rebels. They got involved in the country in that war because they were there, and France could not come as President Bozize wanted. The US could not, and the neighbors were fed up with the situation, and that's why they tried to help the President Bozize at the last time. But I don't think, as they lost, I think 36 or 39 soldiers in Central African Republic. I don't think they will be involving themselves again in the solution there. First, because they have the elections in their country next year, and the second point is that they will certainly be helping as the president of the African Union now is from South Africa. They'll be helping in the political issue of the conflict, but they won't bring any other new soldier on the ground.
Vincent, do you want to come in on that? It's interesting that President Hollande went to see the South African president before French troops got involved on the ground in the CAR.
Well, I think this will be, you can see here the style of the leadership style of François Hollande, who is much more consultative than, for instance, his predecessor, Nicolas Sarkozy. You could see that, for instance, in Mali, before the intervention in Mali, French President Hollande consulted widely all the African presidents, all the African organizations, just to make sure they were on board and just to make sure that they were understanding what France would be trying to achieve in Mali. I think this is pretty much the same in Central African Republic, except that, as we mentioned, South Africa is not really keen to intervene in Central African Republic anymore, at least directly, due to the fallout in their country after a few of their soldiers were shot in March during the Seleka offensive. What we can see now is that South Africa is trying to influence through the African Union. As Louis said, the new president, the new chair of the African Union, Nkosazana Zuma, is from South Africa, and South Africa is getting more and more influence within the African Union. And we could see recently, in recent weeks, in the interactions between the African Union and the regional community in Central Africa, the CEAC, led by Chad, led by Congo-Brazzaville, and so on, that there was a rivalry, basically, arising between those two organizations and behind those two organizations, between South Africa on one side and local regional countries on the other side.
Sylvain, the mayor of Bangui has been elected the interim president. What does interim leadership need to do now to restore peace and stability? What chance is there that they can do that, and what outside help will they need?
I think that will be very difficult situation for the new president until first. I think the priority will be to find a political agreement among all the actors to lead to the next election. We mentioned, I think it's been mentioned, March 2014. There is a lot of work to be done before election can be held.
2015.
15, sorry, to be held in Central African Republic. I believe she needs to bring a dialogue between Françoise Bozizé's sides and also the Seleka.
Are you optimistic that catastrophe can be averted in the Central African Republic?
At the moment, the outlook is not really, from my side, very optimistic.
Yeah.
I believe international community needs to, as we mentioned, all together bring more troops on the ground, but also have more political involvement and from Chad, from Congo, Brazzaville and Cameroon and African Union to solve the situation.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time on this edition of Inside Story. Thank you very much indeed to all of you, Sylvain Touati, Louis Keumayou and Vincent Darracq, and thank you for watching. A reminder that you can find this programme and many more at aljazeera.com. Just follow the link for shows and Inside Story. Thanks once again for watching in Doha. I'm Adrian Finigan. I'll see you again. Bye for now.